Is having a lot of people in the economy a blessing or an absolute disaster? This is what we're going to explore in today's video. Hi friends, welcome to Econverse. I'm Abrar and I'm a fellow student who topped in my GCSE Economics exam last year in Oman. On this channel, we make learning economics simpler, clearer and hopefully a lot more fun. In this video, let's look at population. So let's get straight into it. We're going to be looking at populations in economics and how they impact entire economies. So let's begin by asking ourselves the question, what is a population? So I'm assuming you should probably know this by now. A population essentially refers to all of the people in your country, in your economy. So the population of an economy generally can either grow, which means rise over time, or it could decline and begin decreasing over time. So in this video, we're going to analyze how population growth works, why there's population growth, how it could be perhaps measured, a couple of important ratios, and the effects of an increase in population, and how different policies can be taken in order to control populations. So let's get straight into it. So beginning with the factors affecting population growth. So the factors that affect population growth, I think again it's important to make a really quick list, and I think it's really simple for this one. Firstly, you have your natural increase, which is the difference between birth rate minus death rate, and this shows you the rate of natural increase. So your rate at which population naturally increases in an economy. So you have your birth rate of an economy minus the death rate or the mortality rate. And another important factor that affects your overall population is your immigration, which is, I for immigration essentially means coming in to a country, versus emigration, which is when you're leaving a country, E. So when there's an E, it means you're going out of your country. So essentially this subtraction between immigration and emigration would essentially give you another important figure that determines population growth. Now each of these separate factors are essentially affected by another couple factors. Now let's look at what affects birth rate and death rate. So you could have factors like nutrition, you can have factors like housing, like healthcare, perhaps even the general standard of living. You could have working conditions of the people that are working there. You could have the degree of involvement in military. So military involvement could essentially affect the birth rate and the death rate, because if you have more military involvement, it could be argued that there is a higher death rate. And then you have factors that affect your immigration and emigration. Now these are essentially influenced by factors such as your working economy, like the overall economy, overall GDP growth, etc. So all of these would impact labor, which would impact your all of these would go on to impact labor, and labor is derived demand. So thus these are the main two factors that affect population growth. Now the reasons for why there's different rates of population growth. Now I just suggest that you make a simple list and try and understand each of these items on the list in order to remember it the best. Firstly, some places it may be cheaper to raise children. So we need to understand that raising children itself comes with a massive economic cost to those parents who are involved. So this could essentially significantly impact the incentives of whether they want to have children. Then you have the health of the population. So that is another important one. Then again, you have net migration in the economy, the overall number of people in your economy. And then you have population size, your already existing population size, which you can figure out through four main measures. I mean, we already looked at this to some extent in the previous one, but you can find it out using these four main measures. Birth rate is one of them. Birth rate, your death rate, your infant mortality rate, so the number of infants that die for every 1,000 births. Then you have your net migration. So these are the four factors that essentially impact the population size, and this goes on to impact why different economies have different rates of population. Now let us try and understand what are the different, so let's try and assume a couple of important things here. So let's try and look at this from two scenarios. Let's look at the consequences of population growth, but from the two extremes so that we get a good idea. Number one, let's try and look at the impact of a rise in population. And number two, let's try and look at a fall in population. So you can argue for something we call the aging population. So this is quite prominent in countries such as Japan, wherein they have very little working population and they have a lot of people that are in their aging population that have grown over the age of retirement, so they have very little people who are available to work for the economy. So let's get going with each one of them. So let's start off with the rise in population. So let's look at firstly some of the benefits of these and some of the negative aspects of these. So the benefits is obviously the market size rises because you have many people now demanding, and then you have more factors of production in the economy because you have more labor, you have more factor mobility. Essentially, when you have younger populations, they essentially have more time, which can allow them to be both occupationally mobile and geographically mobile. And then you have higher demand, as we argued, higher demand on an aggregate, like over the whole economy, and you have more labor. When you have more labor, you can produce more, you have more supply. Now let's look at some of the disadvantages. Essentially, you have hunger concerns since you have a massive population. In case there is any natural disaster, you have high concerns of hunger and famines, etc. Then you have restriction on effectiveness of rise in living standards. So this is essentially restricted because when you have more number of people in an economy, there could be free rider problems, etc., which can harm the economy's ability to ensure higher living standards. Then you have issues such as overcrowding, you have environmental pressures, you do have lesser employment opportunities because there's so much competition. And then you have the idea that there could be a balance of payment pressure which rises. This is because when you have more number of people, it is potentially the imports could increase in the economy, which could harm the balance of payments. Now let us look at our second example. Now let us look at a second scenario. Let's look at an aging population and its effects. So we need to look at some of the effects of an aging population. Firstly, you have a rise in something called the dependency ratio. Now let me quickly explain what this means. A dependency ratio is essentially, the formula goes like this. So the number of dependents over the number of people in labor force times 100. So number of people in the labor force refers to the people who are willing and able to work, and the number of dependents essentially include both young and old dependents. So your young dependents are essentially all of the kids or all of the people who are under 18 and cannot work, and your elderly dependents are the people who are above 65 and retired and thus cannot work. You divide this by the number of people in the labor force, so the number of people in the working population, and you multiply it by 100 to find essentially the rate at which you have the number of dependents that need to be taken care of by the independents, if that makes sense. So when you have an aging population, you have a rise in the dependency ratio. This basically means for every single working person now, you will need to take care of many more dependent people. And this could be harmful to the economy. And then you have a change in your labor force. Now, since you don't have a very young labor force when the population is in a decline, you're going to have less productivity, etc. You can have more demand for healthcare. This could potentially be dangerous to the economy because now your labor flexibility, labor factor mobility, etc. decreases. Then you have higher welfare schemes needed. By welfare schemes, I'm referring to ideas such as pensions, so the demand for them would increase. Then you have changing patterns of demand. So the changing patterns of demand in an economy can affect the economy to adjust in the short run, which could significantly harm the economy, perhaps even lead to a recession because the firms will not be able to meet them. Now we've looked at the impacts of a rise in population and we've looked at the impacts of a really bad fall in population. So one of the key areas that we need to take away from this video, in my opinion, is to understand that perhaps the balance between both of them and maintaining a positive yet not too extremely positive, however a mildly positive number in the population growth would be ideal. So you have positive, but you have a balance in it. You essentially ensure that it does not go overboard. And how can you do this? You can use policies such as antinatalist policies, which is when you try and reduce the birth rate. This could, for example, you could use contraceptives, etc. You can perhaps reduce immigration. This is based on the context of your economy. Like if you're a country such as India, which has a heavy population, you could consider such ideas to ensure that your population is growing, however, at a stable rate rather than absolutely expanding. Then you have family planning that you could do. another good measure would be something called the emancipation of women, which is the education and the higher involvement of women in employment, etc. So this would essentially reduce the birth rate in the economy. You could improve healthcare, nutrition, etc. to ensure that the labor is healthy. And that is it for population. So in this video we have gone through all of population and population growth. If you think this video helped you understand economics better, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to join the Econverse. I'll see you with loads more videos to go that go on the rest of the macroeconomic content. And as I've promised you, on this channel you'll find the complete GCSE Economics library. So make sure to hit the subscribe button.